If you would like to support the channel, I would suggest you to check out thesecretsandwich.xyz. It's the Secret Sandwich NFT project. You can come here, you can mint an NFT, or you can come and check out your NFTs. If you want to know more about the Secret Sandwich NFT project, I would suggest you to check out the Medium. I will put a link to this website, and you can check the Medium articles here. Okay, so let's get back to it. Hello, welcome to your snack sandwich. Today I have a different video for you. It's a DeFi snack sandwich. Too long didn't read on DeFi by Caesar. So what is this? It's a long form video now of the basics, the most absolute must-know stuff about DeFi. If you ever want to get into DeFi, if you're new to DeFi and you want to know specific little things, these are the things that you kind of have to know. Okay. Now, if you're one of my longtime viewers, this video is probably not for you. However, maybe you can share it with people that you're trying to, introduce to DeFi and so forth. Now, this is a one long video with many, many slides, and I will put timestamps in the description below, so you can jump around to the timestamps of the different slides. However, I will also cut this all up into individual videos, so each slide into its own video, and I'll make a special list or playlist on YouTube for that, and I'll put that playlist in the description of this video, okay? So, without further ado, let's move over to the first slide. Okay, so the first thing you have to kind of think about a little bit here is blockchains in general, okay? Because blockchains are most blockchains, anything about DeFi has to do with a certain kind of blockchain, okay? So we do have to think about blockchains, and we do have to kind of understand a little bit about the difference of blockchains in order to play with DeFi, some aspects of DeFi's, okay? So we have proof of work blockchains, and that's kind of like Bitcoin, Litecoin, Dogecoin, and these kinds of coins. And basically what they do, if you look over here, is people use money to pay for electricity, and via using that electricity, they're able to mine Bitcoin, right? Now, this is like very, very simplified version of what is proof of work blockchains, and you can dig deeper if you want to. I'm just going to introduce them. So the way I like to look at it is monetary value is locked into the blockchain via the use of electricity, okay? And then we have proof of stake, where people just stake monetary value into the blockchain, and then they're able to write blocks. So as a user, as a normal user, you don't really need to understand the difference between these. If you want to run your own validator nodes, then you obviously have to know the difference. Now, all DeFi currently is on proof of stake blockchains. There's no proof of work blockchains that I know of, or that I use at least, that have DeFi on them. There's no DeFi on Bitcoin, on the Bitcoin blockchain or the Litecoin blockchain. But, so most of the time you're going to be using proof of stake, okay? Now, why this is important is because proof of stake has liquid staking derivatives. And what these are is anybody can stake some of their tokens. So, for example, Ethereum, you can stake Ethereum into the validator nodes in order to get some rewards. So the more people stake into these different protocols, like there's one called Lido, right? And the more people give Lido some of their ETH, then the more validators Lido can spin up and run, because each validator on Ethereum needs 32 ETH, right? So basically it allows you to help decentralize the network in some extent, as long as you don't put all of your ETH in one of those protocols like Lido. Lido's pretty decentralized, but there are other options as well to choose. Now, how this becomes DeFi is they have these liquid staking derivatives. If you stake your ETH into a node, into a validator node, your ETH is locked, right? It's locked for some time period. I'm not going to get into how long it's going to be, because in the future it will not be locked for as long as it is now, right? So, but what these liquid staking derivatives do is whenever you lock your tokens, your ETH into the validator node via these different protocols, they give you another token that's like a receipt token, and then you can take that receipt token out into DeFi and use it as collateral or trade it or do all kinds of things with it, okay? So it's quite important. Now, the execution is something that you need to understand, because execution is you need to pay gas. Now, all blockchains currently, they have a native token, And that native token is usually the token that is used to pay gas. So on Ethereum, you need to hold ETH in order to pay gas. And I like to think of it like a truck. If you want to move money from one place to another, like actual cash bills, then you have to put it into a truck and you need to pay the gas to drive on the road from point A to point B. And the same thing here. Whenever you want to make a change to the ledger or change the status of the blockchain, then you need to pay some gas, and that's paid in ETH, okay, on Ethereum. So we have these L2s, like for example, Arbitrum or Optimism, and then we also have some kind of side chains like Phantom or maybe Polygon. It might be considered a side chain or an L2. It's a disputable one, but they've got all these different like places where you can also do DeFi. And basically what the purpose of these is because Ethereum can get congested. And if you think of it like New York City, do you want to drive around in New York City? If you want to drive around in New York City, you're going to spend a lot of gas because you're going to be stop, go, stop, go, stop, go. So what do people do is they move their business, or they move their traffic, or they move their needs outside of the center of the city, like outside of Manhattan to the suburbs outside. And then that's the way I kind of think of the blockchains, is like Ethereum is like the capital city, and then you have Arbitrum and Optimism and Phantom and Polygon and Binance Smart Chain, all like suburbs around Ethereum in a sense. This is the way I think of it, but maybe that's ETH maxi mentality, okay? Now the key thing about this is bridges. Bridges are the way to take your tokens from the capital city out to the side city. So like the New Jersey Bridge or the Brooklyn Bridge, think of it that way. Like in order for you to move your money from Ethereum to Optimism, you need to cross a bridge, okay? And there are many bridges and many opportunities. Now the last thing I'm going to talk about blockchains here is, if you look down here, I have a YouTube logo here. On all of my slides, I'll have a YouTube logo, and this leads to a playlist that has all videos that kind of talk about the stuff that you see in this slide. So in this playlist, you will see stuff perhaps about general things about blockchains. You might see some stuff about some liquid staking derivatives, and then some videos about bridges and so forth. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. Okay, the next slide is kind of like a DeFi overview. This is kind of like a table of contents of all the slides that will be following this. Now this one won't have its own video because it's just a table of contents, okay? So basically I'm going to talk about DEXs, I'm going to talk about the money markets, I'm going to talk about stablecoins, I'm going to talk about leveraging up and leveraging down as well, veLocking of tokens, yield aggregators, and real world assets. So all the following slides will go through these different, I have a slide for each of these things, okay? Now I've also put here a link to my YouTube channel, as well as a link to my Twitter. Now, again, this actual, I will put a link also in the description to this entire this entire slideshow, and then you can come in here and click these different links. Okay, on to the next one. So first one here, we have decentralized exchanges, AMMs or DEXs. There are different names for these, okay? And there are different kinds that you can find around in DeFi. So the first kind is a Uniswap or Uniswap style DEX, okay? Now, Uniswap was the first one to create this. And basically what they do is they allow you to go with one token and swap it for another token. So if we look over here, we have apples and oranges, right? So they use this thing called the constant product. So if you think of it this way, right now there are 3 apples and 3 oranges, and 1 apple is worth 1 orange, right? If you come in here and you look at this, you're like, oh, there's the same amount of apples, same amount of oranges. Supply and demand makes them equal, right? Now, if I put in an apple here and I take out an orange, there are 4 apples and 2 oranges. So now oranges are more valuable than apples, okay? And then if I come back with 1 apple, and then I will be able to maybe take out 1 and a little bit of if I come back with 1 orange, maybe I'll be able to take out 1 and a little bit of apples, okay? So this is kind of how constant product works and how Uniswap works. It's basically 2 tokens. They're compared to each other based on their supply inside this pool, okay? Now we have version 3. Version 3 works very similar. However, there's a concentrated liquidity of it. So this is like the prices of apples versus oranges. If you're thinking about the US dollar value of the two apples and the oranges, eventually the apples will all be gone as you trade. So version 3 is very hard to explain in very simple terms, and I think I have a video on it, but I'm not sure. But this would require you to really dig deep. But just understand that, like, in version 3, you can get impermanent loss quite quickly. So you have to be careful. You have to really understand version 3 before you start using it, okay? Then we have SushiSwap, which brought about the idea of rewarding people with other tokens, okay? So SushiSwap is a Uniswap fork. They're the same. They use the constant product, and then they've started to develop other products as time progressed. But when they first came out, they were a Uniswap copy. However, they added a reward token to it. So when you provide, let's say you came with 3 apples and 3 oranges, and you put them in the market so that people could trade and give you a trading fees, then SushiSwap would also give you the sushi token, which is a governance token and a reward token of this system, okay? Now, this is very prevalent now in DeFi. Almost all products or all projects have a reward token of some sense. And then you need to find out what is the utility of that reward token. Because as more and more innovation happens, more ideas come out, that in the reward token becomes a utility token that has use case. Okay, next one we have is Curve. Now, Curve is a stable swap. And basically, it's a way to trade apples for apples, okay? Different kinds of apples for different kinds of apples, but they're all apples. So an apple should always be worth an apple in this sense. It just happens to be an apple from a different company, okay? So this, a good example of this is like USDT and USDC, okay? So those 2 apples should always trade 1-to-1, okay? So and that's the idea of Curve, is a place where you can trade pegged assets. But they also do allow for apples and oranges. But when it first came out, the idea was to be able to let you to trade apples for apples without having major price impacts on the prices of those 2 apples. Because now, if you empty most of these red apples become just like a tiny fraction of what they are, and there's a whole bunch of green apples, then they will no longer trade 1-to-1. Okay, so this is something, if you're going to use Curve, you have to look at the ratios. What you want to be is a good ratio of like 50-50, or if there are three kinds of apples, then you want 33, 33, 33, okay, something like that. Okay, then came Balancer. Balancer's another DEX or AMM that allows for the trading of many different types. So Uniswap only allows 2 tokens, okay? But Balancer allows for 3, 4, 5 tokens. And the more tokens you put in there, then the less of percentage of that pool is owned by that token. So as you look in here, let's say there are 3 apples, 2 red apples, and 1 orange apple. So as you can see, when the pool is created, the percentages of them are not the same, okay? They don't have to be like 33, 33, 33% like they do on Curve. They can be, 10%, 20%, and 70%, or whatever, right? Whatever balancer you decide as a pool creator you want your pool to be. Okay, now they also have Solidity, okay, and Solidity is another style AMM that's come out, and it really turns things around a little bit. It changes a lot of the underlying mechanisms of the voting and the reward tokens of these different pools, and it also has both a stable swap and a constant product. The ability to deploy both constant product and stable swap pools inside Solidly. I have videos on Solidly, so check out my playlist and you can find out more. What is the solid? I've spelled it wrong, but anyways, Solidly form the Solidly of this kind of DEX. Okay. Now the last kind of DEXs or places where you can trade are derivatives, perpetuals, and options trading platforms. Now I've grouped these up because they're kind of basically where you would go to trade apples. You would use apples in order to trade fake tokens. Now, when I say fake tokens, I don't mean that they're not valuable or you're not going to make money. It's not like playing money with like a practice trading account. It's actual monetary value in there. However, there's no apple in here. It's basically you use your apples and then you mint up oranges that are not actually oranges, but the ghost knows the price of oranges and he follows the price of oranges. So when you trade this ghost, you're actually trading the price of oranges. And now there's a lot more to it than this, but this is for like more sophisticated users. But what that allows, what these derivatives, perpetuals, and options protocols usually allow people to do is they allow people to trade with leverage, okay? So that's one of the major benefits. So that's it for this slide. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, here we have money markets, okay, the second slide of this presentation. And money markets are a place where you can kind of lend tokens in order to borrow other tokens. Now, there are two key reasons why you would want to do this. Number one is it allows for leveraging, because you can use your, so for example, you can use your sandwiches, right, to borrow some US dollars, and you still own the sandwiches, okay? Or the other thing is maybe you need these US dollars to buy something, and you don't want to sell the sandwiches because maybe you're down on the price of sandwiches has gone down and you're in a loss. Or maybe you just don't want to, you're above and you don't want to sell the sandwiches at this point because then you'll have to pay capital gains. So instead you can borrow versus those, and then it's not a taxable event to borrow. And then you can also write off the interest because you are borrowing, right? Because there's usually interest on the borrowed dollars, right? If that's something you want to track and to claim in your taxes or so forth, or if that's even possible in your country. Okay, so the first concepts here that we need to go over is the idea of over-collateralization. In DeFi, most of them, if not all of the protocols that are successful and very abundant in DeFi, all require over-collateralization. So basically, $200 of sandwiches to borrow $100 of USDC. Now, you still own the $200. So now you have $300 worth of value, and you can take that $100 and put it somewhere else in DeFi to gain yield. As long as your yield that you're putting this to work, as long as the place you're putting it to work is giving you better return on investment than the cost of borrowing, then you're making profit. This is leveraging up, okay? So money markets are very popular for this use case. So one of the things you have to concern yourself is most money markets, there is only one that I'm aware of right now at the time of this recording, but most money markets require an oracle. They need some way to check the value of these sandwiches, as well as the value of the token or the asset that you're borrowing. It doesn't have to be dollars. It could be like Ethereum. You could use sandwiches to borrow oranges, right? And it needs to be able to compare the prices of these two assets so that it knows that you're still over collateralized. So if the price, the value of sandwiches goes down below the value of the assets you've borrowed, then you will be liquidated. And liquidation tends to be an automatic thing in DeFi. It's not something, they're not going to call you up on the phone and say, hey, listen, you have to pay us, you have to blah, 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 or they're not going to send you messages. You're just going to wake up one morning and you're going to be liquidated. And basically what the liquidator will do is he will pay off your debt, remove your assets, sell your assets, and recoup his money plus some, because there's always a benefit because you're over collateralized and there's always a small extra left aside for him to liquidate you. You will still have the borrowed assets. So you will still have the assets that you borrowed. So it's more like, it's not really like liquidated in a sense. It is liquidation, but you don't think of it like liquidation. I try to think of it as selling the bottom. So basically you will sell your tokens at the point where you get liquidated. And then that's a taxable event as well. So you have to consider that. If you get liquidated, it's the same as selling them at that time when you're liquidated. Okay, so, and you'll probably end up with less than if you just actually paid your debt off, sold the tokens, and then, because of the bonus that the liquidator gets, okay? So oracles are very strong part of these money markets, and you have to kind of check which oracle are they using? Are they using Chainlink? Or are they using, time-weighted average? Or what are they using as an oracle to decide the prices of these? And these oracles are the main reason why a lot of money markets have been exploited in the past. So the oracle is a very key factor and something you should really try to understand if you're going to use money markets and if you're going to put a substantial amount of money into a single money market, okay? So borrow and sell, that's basically the idea that I was talking about, like you can borrow this asset and then you can sell it, right? So this is a way to short, okay? So let's say that instead of dollars here, let's say I put in sandwiches and I borrow oranges, but I think oranges price is going to go down. So I borrow the oranges, right? I sell the oranges. And then when the price of oranges goes down, I can buy back my debt cheaper and repay my debt and keep the profits that I got. So the borrow versus sell is a kind of a place where, people can, they can short tokens in a way as well. Okay. So the borrow and sell has two factors. Okay. It has that as well as the idea of like, if I borrow, then I'm not, having a taxable event, okay? So we have mixed pools versus isolated markets. This is also important, okay? There's a lot of money markets where you have a whole bunch of assets and you can use any of those assets to borrow a whole bunch of assets. So if people put apples and avocados and grapes inside here, then anyone can borrow the apples, avocados, and grapes by supplying any of these as collateral, okay? So they have these mixed pools, which are considered a little bit dangerous, but not terribly dangerous, because what mixed pools tend to do is they tend to use assets that are not so easy to manipulate. So there's a lot of apples outside. There's a lot of avocados. There's a lot of grapes. It's very difficult to change the price of apples, oranges, or apples, avocados, and grapes. However, if you put some exotic fruit in there, then it might be easy to manipulate the price of it. So mixed pools tend to have blue chips or very dependable tokens inside them. Then we have isolated markets, which is kind of more like the idea of like a money market where you can only supply one asset to borrow a different asset. Okay, and maybe there are many different markets inside this one protocol, and there's a protocol where you can use apples to buy or borrow grapes. You can use apples to borrow avocados. You can use avocados to borrow apples, and so forth, right? So there's all kinds of possibilities. And what this does is it allows them to use more exotic fruit and to reduce the risk, because that exotic fruit doesn't expose all the other assets to this kind of risk, okay? Now, the last thing about this money markets I will talk about is the interest APY. Now, most of the time, the interest APY is based on supply and demand, okay? So let's say there's a lot of apples in here. People supplied a lot of apples, and you want to borrow apples. If there's a lot of supply, then the interest on the borrowing will be very low. But as more and more and more people borrow apples, everyone's APY starts to go up. Okay, so it's called the utilization. So the higher the utilization, the higher the borrowing, the less supply inside the market, the higher the interest APY. So this is something you need to monitor. If you just borrow some apples and say, oh, it's 3%, that's great. Oh, I can do that. I can pay that. And you don't monitor it, you might end up paying 6% most of the time and end up with an average of like 4 or 5%. So you kind of have to monitor most of them. There are some markets that are attempting to create a fixed interest. However, the system, it's hard for fixed interest to work, because then people are not incentivized to repay debt when there is a crunch. And if I borrow all the apples, then the person who lent the apples cannot get their apples back until I repay the apples that I've borrowed. So there needs to be an incentivization to make people to repay their debts if there are too many apples taken out of the marketplace. Okay, so I'll also point down here, remind you that I do have a playlist here that kind of talks a lot about all the different money markets that I've looked at inside my channel. Moving on. Okay, the next thing that you need to understand about DeFi is what we call stablecoins. Okay, stablecoins are usually pegged to the US dollar. So it's usually a dollar, okay? And most of the time that dollar is, it's $1 US. So like USDT, USDC, DAI, all of these kind of stablecoins that are pegged to the US dollar. However, they could be pegged to an asset, okay? Like there's a a token called Pax Gold that's pegged to the value of gold. Okay, so that's still a stable coin. Okay, it's just not what most people will refer to as a stable coin. So for the rest of this, I'm going to talk mostly about the US dollar stablecoins. And when people do talk about stablecoins, they're usually talking about US dollar stablecoins. So you can assume that they're talking about US dollar stablecoins, but know that they might not be, okay? So the first thing is that most stablecoins that have been successful have some sort of backing, okay? They're backed by something, some sort of monetary value, okay? So they could be backed by some sort of collateralization, maybe a US dollar. So, for example, Tether or USDC, their stablecoin is backed by actual dollars or monetary value in the traditional finance system. So maybe they hold bonds or they hold actual US dollars in a bank account, and they mint stablecoins onto the blockchain. Other collateralizations could be like sandwiches. Oh, I use my sandwiches and as collateralization and I mint a stable coin. Okay, there's a lot of these in the market. There's a lot. And you have to consider the value of this backing when you're thinking of using this stable coin. If this sandwich token is very risky and highly volatile and might even be worthless in the future, then your stablecoin is going to be worthless because it has to be redeemed back to sandwiches, right? So the only way to get out of this is to redeem to sandwiches or to trade it, okay? And the other thing is what we call algorithmic, okay? I'm not going to get deep into this, but basically there are stablecoins that are not collateralized or they're semi-collateralized, and they use some sort of algorithm. They use mathematical automation to adjust the supply, to mint and to burn stable coins so that the value, the supply, meets the demand and they stay stable, okay? So this is backing of stable coins, okay? So we have LPs, and LPs are basically liquidity pools, and I've talked about that before in slide 1, where I talked about DEXs and AMMs. So this is a place where you can trade one kind of dollar for another kind of dollar, okay? So, USDT for USDC, and these LPs are usually the major tool that the stablecoin uses in order to have a peg maintenance, okay? So the peg maintenance is, like in this case, they are US dollars. They want it to be worth always $1 US, but when people buy it, it's going to go up in value. So using the collateralization and the LP, then people will mint more tokens and sell them to bring the price down. Or if it's down, they will buy them cheap and redeem them for the underlying assets. This is usually how peg maintenance is worked. So it's using arbitrage of the price inside the LP or inside the DEX, and then also the supplying and or minting or burning of the stablecoin for the underlying asset. Okay? So now most stablecoins in DeFi, like USDT, USDC, they don't have interest. However, a lot of the projects that are actual decentralized and run on the blockchain completely do have an interest aspect to it. So like if I use sandwiches to mint $1 US, right? Then sometimes this $1 US will have an interest. So when I want to get my sandwiches back, I will have to pay $1 US plus the interest, okay? So you have to look for that. So again, we have a playlist down here, and you can watch it. I talk a lot about the different stablecoins, and I encourage you to check them out. Okay, the next slide we have here is called levering up, okay? This is one of the superpowers of DeFi. It has the ability to allow you to lever up without kind of worrying about KYC, who you are, what's your credit rating. All this stuff doesn't matter in DeFi. It just because everything is usually over collateralized. However, you can lever up. You can take, $200 worth of value, lever up to get another additional $100. Now you have $300 worth of value that you can use, okay? So there are two ways that you can generally lever up. There are other ways, but for the most part, you're looking at using the two that I've talked about before, where you use the money markets or the stablecoins. Okay, these are usually the safest. There are ways to use DEX to lever up as well, but let's stick with this for now, okay? So the money market is the place where you supply a token and you borrow another token. The stablecoin is the place where you supply a token and you mint, you back a stablecoin, okay? So the supply that you supplied is always yours. You retain that as long as you don't get liquidated, okay? And where the levering comes up is where you take the asset that you've either borrowed or minted and you put it to work. So we have this idea called yield farming, and that's where you just add, let's say you take your ETH and you use it to borrow some US dollars, and then you take those US dollars and you put them in some sort of place that rewards you with a utility token or a reward token. Now you're getting that reward token on borrowed dollars. So you've used borrowed dollars, you haven't sold anything, you haven't had to buy that utility token. You're farming it, okay? You're growing it for free in a way. You know, you're the only cost you have is actually opportunity cost and then perhaps some sort of smart contract risk cost, okay? That to consider. Now the other thing you can do with it is you can take those US dollars and you can just lend them on money markets. So a very good example is like a lot of people will do this. They use a money market, right? So they use some sandwiches and they'll borrow some US dollars and then they'll take those US dollars and they'll immediately lend them back on the same market. And then you're only exposed to one protocol. The other opportunity is, stablecoins. You use some sandwiches, you mint some stablecoins, and then you take those stablecoins and you lend them on a money market. Okay, so this is a common way to kind of make some APY. Okay, now this is also, the last ones I'm going to talk about is levering up as well, but it's kind of a little bit more risky. Okay, so you take some, asset, you get some stablecoins or you borrow some assets, and you use those assets to buy some other assets in the real world. So maybe you buy some NFTs. Or maybe you actually buy a house. Now, this is speculation. You're hoping that the value of these assets will go up in the future so that you're actually making money. So this is a little bit speculating, a little bit risky, but it's still levering up, okay? Because I didn't sell my sandwiches in order to buy my house. I just used the value of my sandwiches to borrow money, which is a tax write-off in most countries, the interest, right? And then I use that value to buy one of these assets and hope they will go up in value or, subsidize my living costs or something like this. And the last thing is maybe you go out and you buy something fancy for yourself, like a liability, like a car or some jewelry or something that you feel that just makes you happy but you don't expect it to go up in value. This is also a possibility, but this is a high risk thing because if you need to pay off your debt to get your sandwiches out, then you will need to somehow come up with that money to pay your debt. Because if your sandwiches go down in value, then you might get liquidated unless you repay your debt. So this is the most risky thing, and I tend to not try to encourage people to do these bottom ones, but people still do it, okay? Now I do have a playlist here on levering up, like protocols that give you the ability to lever up, and there's a lot of them in this space, and they're very unique and very different. So I would suggest you to go through this and check them. Okay, the next concept in DeFi that you need to kind of understand is what we call veLocking tokens. Now, vote escrow locked tokens, okay? The first protocol to do this was Curve Finance, but now it's pretty rampant everywhere. And then there's also improvements and iterations on this, okay? But most of the thing that you need to understand about veLocking tokens are these four aspects of them, okay? So the first thing is usually there is a VE decay. So let's say you take the reward token, the utility token, and you lock it up for 4 years, and then it gives you some benefits in the protocol, right? Which I will talk about in a second. But as time progresses, as the 4 years finishes, then your tokens unlock and you can pull them out. So it's a way to not sell your asset, but to get benefits without selling that asset, okay? And it kind of forces people, if they want those benefits, to not be able to sell their tokens. And it's kind of useful in that sense for a protocol to adopt veLocking so that people don't sell their tokens like based on emotion because it's impossible for you to sell your tokens. Okay, so this is usually the VE decay idea, okay? The next thing we have is VE boost. So whenever you have VE locked tokens, generally speaking, they give you a boost on the reward token that you get. So let's say I've provided liquidity to an AMM. They're giving me some reward token, right? And I lock the reward token. Then I get a higher APY on the same money that I have given to refarm those reward tokens, okay? Now, a lot of protocols also require you to VE lock in order to be able to vote, okay? Now, that's the main utility, the starting utility of most tokens, and why most tokens are called governance tokens. And that is the idea is if the protocol wants to change something, they want it to be decentralized. They want the changes to be decided by everyone in the community as a democracy. So the way they usually do this now is if you want to be part of this, you want to be a citizen of this small community, then you need to lock your tokens to prove that you have skin in the game. Now, some protocols don't require locking in order to voting, but most of them, or at least any of them that have VE locking mechanisms, usually give the voting rights to the people who have VE locked the tokens. Now, this could be all kinds of stuff. It could also be voting on which assets or which liquidity pools or which anything are valid and should be rewarded with the reward token, okay? So this is voting in a sense. And the last thing is VE bribe, okay? There's a lot of protocols where they ask you to vote for them and they will bribe you for it. So there's actually tokens sitting in contracts saying, hey, vote on our asset, put your reward token, your utility token as a reward for our asset, and then we will bribe you, we will pay you. This is very common inside DeFi now, and it's all transparent. Okay, it's not like they pay you under the table or they secretly hide it. It's all transparently on the blockchain. Everyone can see it. Everyone who has voting tokens can get a portion of those bribes by voting accordingly. Okay, so I have some videos down here that you can check out about VE or protocols that have VE locking mechanisms in them and so forth. And I suggest you to go and check it out. Okay, so the next thing we have is called yield aggregators. Yield aggregators are a place where you can put your money and you can basically not to do anything and get gains, okay? So this, if we look over here at these emojis, you can kind of see what's happening here, okay? So basically I have some money and I put it into the yield aggregator. The yield aggregator sends the money to different farms, rewards tokens, gets those reward tokens, and does stuff with those reward tokens, okay? And usually, in most places, it's, sell all those reward tokens for whatever this asset is, and then add it to my holdings. So maybe some here, some here, some here, sell everything, and I get more dollars. So I put $100 in, they send, or let's say I put $30 in and they get $10, $10, $10, they make $1 on each, and now I have, $33 after some time inside this asset. Okay, so there's three things you need to understand about when you're using a yield aggregator, and that is they will usually give you back a share token. Sometimes they don't, but usually you put in your dollars or your asset, right? And they give you back another token. And that token can be used in other places. You can take it to a DEX, you can take it to different places. You can send that token to your friend, okay? Now, you need that token to get your assets back out. So it's very important to understand, do I get a share token? And what is my share token? And, make sure if you do send that share token somewhere, that you understand that you are giving up the rights to withdraw your capital from the yield aggregator. A lot of yield aggregators are lossless. Okay, some of them are not, but usually some of them are. And especially Yearn Finance is touted to be always lossless. They design strategies where they can't lose the money, okay? So you put your $100 in here and you will always be able to get your $100 out, assuming, the place is not hacked. So, for example, they will never take your asset and trade it for another asset because that asset might go down in value and then you lose money. That's like a hedge fund or a mutual fund. You can lose money if you give money to a mutual fund because they are trading and speculating on the value of other assets. Whereas in DeFi, yield aggregators tend not to do that. Okay, so you got to make sure, you got to check, is this yield aggregator using a strategy that is lossless? Now, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing that it's not lossless. It might have a very good track record. You might understand the strategy to be, it's not 100% lossless possibility. However, the track record is very lossless. So you can use your judgment on that, okay? Now, total value locked, assets under management. This is also important because the reason why I put this here is so I can highlight the idea that some of these yield aggregators in the past, not too much now, have used total value locked in order to kind of entice people. Okay, so total value locked has some different repercussions or different considerations when you're looking at this number. So first of all is if they have a large amount of money and they deploy it to these farms, then they dilute the APY of these farms because they've put so much money in. So when you put your assets into a high value place, your APY tends to be lower, right? Because they are deploying a lot of assets here and reducing the amount of share tokens, the amount of reward tokens is the same, but it's being spread against a larger TVL, okay? Now, another aspect of this is sometimes the fees are based on TVL or based on assets under management inside this vault, but most cases they're not now, okay? The fees of these things usually come out of the reward. So let's say $1 worth of rewards. Maybe they take 50 cents of that $3 and they keep it and they give it to you. Now, why would you want to give them 50 cents? Because you do nothing, okay? Because all the gas costs of this are socialized across everybody who is put their assets inside the yield aggregator. And that's also very important to consider. Like, you do nothing. You put your assets in here and you walk away. You're going to want to check on everything, like all DeFi. You want to come back, check, stay plugged in a sense, socially to the aspect to make sure you know what's going on. However, you don't have to click any buttons. You don't have to pay any gas. The only time you will pay gas is when you decide to withdraw again, okay? Now, I have a lot of videos down here on yield aggregators, and I do suggest you to check them out, okay? Let's move on. Okay, the next one we have real world assets. Now, this is a upcoming new idea in DeFi, and there are probably going to be a lot more of this than there is now. However, it's a very exciting aspect for me because basically, for when I talk to people in the real world about DeFi and cryptocurrencies, common thing they say is, I want something that I can see, I can touch. I know, like, I invest in Tesla, they make cars, they make real things. But if I invest in Bitcoin, what do I actually have? Do I have something in my hand? Like, you got nothing, right? So they don't understand the aspect of value in the cloud. They want to see things. They want to see buildings. They want to see things like this. So there are different kinds of real world assets that are in DeFi that we can talk about. Okay, so we have NFTs. Now, NFTs are, like, maybe somebody will say, well, Caesar, an NFT is on the blockchain. It's not real world. But I like to consider it a real world asset because even if it's just a picture, right? A picture of an ape. It was drawn by a person in the real world. It might be like a digital picture, of course it is, right? But it's still physical work. Someone did real world work and built this asset, okay? And maybe there are some cases where, an NFT is a representation of a real world thing. And that's basically where I can get on to the next thing, okay? So there are actual protocols in DeFi where you can invest in real estate with your cryptocurrencies. And they actually own real physical buildings. So there are some where they actually take a building. So maybe it's a commercial building, right? So they take a commercial building. So the owner of that commercial building tokenizes the deed or the value, the ownership of that building, and sells the tokens pro rata, or it just disperses them to people who invest. Okay, so what this does is it allows you to buy a piece of a property as opposed to owning an entire property. Like most people cannot buy a high-rise apartment building. We're not all Donald Trump, right? So, but we can definitely own a portion of that building. And then maybe you have to dig deeper. Does this building produce any kind of revenue? And does that revenue go back to the token holders and stuff like this? You have to dig deeper, right? So like you're not going to be able to go, oh, I have, 64 tokens. I want, apartment 306. This is not usually the case right now, but maybe in the future it might be the case, okay? So real estate. And then we also have real world assets, okay? There are some token projects that have tokenized via NFTs. So they give you an NFT that represents a real world asset. So maybe some wine inside a cellar. So maybe some actual gold coins. So there's actual gold bars inside safes. And you can take a token and then now you own a portion of that gold. And sometimes you can even take, if you have enough of those tokens, you can redeem them for the gold and they will send the gold to you. And of course you have to consider the cost of sending and actually going to the vault and withdrawing the gold or whatever that case be. And there are also assets where you can get like, watches. So some, usually these assets are held in some sort of vault or secure facility, and you basically own the rights to that asset. And then you can very easily trade that asset. You don't have to withdraw that. You don't have to walk into the vault, take the watch out of the vault, walk to the pawn shop and sell it. You can just sell them the token that you own this asset. And then if they want, they can redeem the token for the underlying asset in the real world. So that's pretty much it. That's all I have for this series. I might add to this in the future as things go, but this is kind of all we have for today and all we have for this video. I hope this has been enjoyable and useful, and I hope that you enjoyed watching this and you've learned something. If you have any questions and stuff, feel free to DM me. However, I do get a lot of DMs, so don't feel offended if I don't actually answer you in a timely manner. Okay, so thanks so much, and I do suggest you to come and check out my channel. I have a lot of videos that talk specifics and explain everything little aspect of how protocols work. I don't talk about prices. I don't talk about tokenomics, so to speak. I generally just explain how does the system work underneath the hood. So I hope you enjoyed this, and thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.